This show is brought to you in part by viewers like you who joined a Patreon or become YouTube members. Thank you. And if you could, hit the like button and subscribe if you want more Browns-focused content.
All right, yesterday I did a video on how it is that Joe Flacco can win the starting job. And just to prove that this is a more of an exercise than a wish fulfillment thing for me, I'm going to do this for every quarterback, right, in this competition. Shador, Dillon, Kenny Pickett. We're going to talk about how they can win the starting job. Today, we're going to talk about probably my least favorite option, Kenny Pickett. How can Kenny Pickett become the starting quarterback of the Cleveland Browns, at least week one, right? Now, again, this is not my favorite option. But I really do believe, like I mentioned in the Joe Flacco video, that this is what the coaching staff wants. The reason why I believe this, I think is pretty inherently obvious. The Browns want somebody to win this job that they can start for 17 games and trust versus in-division opponents. Kenny Pickett is old enough to be experienced, especially in division. He's played with the Pittsburgh Steelers. He knows this division well. But he's also young enough where you don't have to have concerns about him playing a full season, and young enough to where you believe that there could be some upside that can be unlocked if you just put him in the right circumstance. Whether that being true or not, I don't know. But you can still reasonably believe it, right? It's not like you're bringing in a 33-year-old and saying we're going to get more out of him this year. You're bringing in somebody who's around the age of like 26, 27, same age as Sam Darnold was last year. So it's like, would it really be a surprise if he put it together, right? Like, it wouldn't be the biggest surprise in the world. I mean, think about it like this. He's in the last year of his rookie deal. It took Baker until 1 or 2 years after his rookie deal to really catch on with the team and become, the starting quarterback that a lot of people envisioned he'd be when he was drafted number 1 overall. So that, to me, means that the Browns are looking at him as the guy that they want to have be the starter. It makes a ton of sense. Joe Flacco is too old to believe he's going to start 17 games. He literally has not done it since Lamar Jackson entered the league, right? That's the last year. When Lamar Jackson was at Louisville, two-time MVP Lamar Jackson was at Louisville. When Josh Allen was at Wyoming, when Baker Mayfield was playing against Nick Chubb in the Rose Bowl, that's the last time that Joe Flacco played 17 games. Deshaun Watson was in his second year. It's been a long time, is what I'm saying, since Joe Flacco has played 17 games. I'm not being ageist, but let's be real. It's football. There's a little room for ageism in football. Being old matters. He's really old. You can't expect him to play 17 games. I think that's ludicrous. And I don't think the Browns expect him, if he plays, to play 17 games. And that's why the Browns have not just deemed Joe Flacco as the starter, because they understand that dude's not going to play 17 games, right? If you have Joe Flacco start, you better feel really good about your rookies, right? If you feel great about your rookies, you throw Joe Flacco out there. But if you don't feel great about your rookies, you hoping Kenny Pickett can give you a solid 17. Because the Browns want to get as stable of a quarterback room as possible out of this season. So that is why I think the Browns coaching staff, at the very least, is going to want Kenny Pickett to win this job. Like, it's obvious to me they want Kenny Pickett to win this job. They talk about Kenny Pickett like he's the starter. Kenny Pickett be talking about Kenny Pickett like he's the starter. They want him to win this job. That does not guarantee he's going to do it. I don't think the Browns are going to rig it towards Kenny Pickett, but they want him to win the job. That's the guy they bet on, right? Bet a little bit on, right? So they want Kenny to win this job. I'm convinced of that. I'm not really buying that they want somebody else to win it. at this point. You look at that starting stretch of the season, they play Cincinnati, they play at Baltimore, at Pittsburgh, versus Detroit, versus the Vikings, versus Green Bay. They're not trying to throw a rookie quarterback out against all of that. So they want Kenny to win the job. Now, what are the issues with Kenny winning the job? Well, one, Kenny Pickett is a very limited middle of the field thrower in the NFL at the very least. In 2023, the last year he was considered a starting quarterback when he was with Pittsburgh, he threw about 11% of his passes deep or intermediate in the middle of the field. And he went 13 of 33, which is 39%, 2 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. To compare this to what I think the baseline number is going to be, which is what Joe Flacco did in 2023, I think the Browns are going to want whoever they start to either meet this number, which Joe Flacco clearly does, or exceed this number, right? They want Joe Flacco had 14.5% of his targets intermediate deep in the middle of the field, which is up 3.5 from where Kenny Pickett was. Joe Flacco was 21 of 34, 61%, which is a 20-point improvement from where Kenny Pickett was, and 2 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. So, that's what the Browns want. They want better efficiency, better accuracy, and a lot of use in the middle of the field. When the Browns don't use the middle of the field, the Kevin Stefanski offense looks awful, right? DTR refused to use the middle of the field. Deshaun Watson refused to use the middle of the field, and we saw how this team was punished offensively because of that. Now, the good news, if you're a Kenny Pickett supporter, is that there is stuff that suggests that maybe Kenny Pickett's aversion to the middle of the field is not necessarily all on Kenny and more on Pittsburgh, right? Because that's really the only team we have information to pull from for Kenny in the NFL is what he did at Pittsburgh. And we know Pittsburgh's offensive coordinator situation for the last 6 years have been dubious at best. So there might be something to that. Also, if you look at Kenny Pickett's college numbers, which, again, we're talking about college numbers. There's a lot of context that goes into this. College, the middle of the field is much more open because the hashes are wider, level of play is slower. Also got to remember that Kenny Pickett played during the COVID year. So there were a lot of people who didn't play that year in college football because of COVID. The ACC was awful that year, and because of COVID, there wasn't a lot of out-of-conference scheduling. So there's a lot of asterisks to go over these numbers before you get excited about them. But in college, in his last year in college, Kenny Pickett was really good in the middle of the field. He was 67 of 107, which is 65%, threw 20 touchdowns and 2 interceptions. Now, how does somebody who had 65% deep middle of the field, intermediate middle of the field, 20 touchdowns, 2 interceptions in that same range, go from that to in the NFL, 13 to 33, 39%, 2 touchdowns, 2 interceptions? Well, one, the ACC is not the NFL, especially the ACC that Kenny Pickett played against during the pandemic season of college football. And also college football, massively different game. We're going to go over this when we look at Dylan Gabriel's college numbers and even Shedeur Sanders' college numbers to demonstrate just how much more difficult the middle of the field is to utilize in the NFL than it is in college. But what those college numbers do indicate, because Kenny Pickett threw about 21.8% of his passing attempts in the middle of the field, is that Kenny at one point in time was willing to throw in the middle. Now, did he stop throwing in the middle of the field because that's what the Steelers told him to do? Or what's probably more likely was his limitations physically, or were his limitations physically drastic enough to where it dissuaded him from throwing in the middle of the field because he just wouldn't be effective? That's the big question he has to answer, because we don't have a clear answer on that. I can guess why it is he doesn't use the middle of the field, but we don't have a clear answer on that. And in order for Kenny Pickett to win this job, he's going to have to use the middle of the field, right? And I think he is the person whose training camp performance matters the most, right? What this guy does during training camp, it matters. He has to be the best quarterback coming out of camp in order to get the starting job. Yes, the Browns aren't going to want to start rookies, but you got to look better than Joe Flacco. You got to at least make the Browns believe that you can give them more than Joe Flacco can. And I think even if you look just as good as Joe Flacco, but the rookies look better than you during camp, that also puts your roster spot in danger. So make no mistake about it, Kenny's going to have to look the best at practice to be able to win this job. And the issue with Kenny so far, it's mini camp, but he hasn't been the guy that people have been talking about at practice more often than not. Now, when the pads come on, that's going to change things for the rookies. That's going to change things for Joe Flacco. Well, not really Joe Flacco, but that's going to change things for the rookies. And maybe something goes down where Kenny starts to outshine the rest, but that's really where Kenny has to answer. He has to use the middle of the field. He has to be willing to attack, and he has to demonstrate that. Him not using the middle of the field efficiently in Pittsburgh was a Pittsburgh thing and not a Kenny Pickett thing. If he demonstrates that successfully, then he has a chance to keep this job, because Kenny is going to be able to keep the interceptions low, or at least if he's able to keep the interceptions low and utilize the middle of the field, then the Browns will have no problem starting Kenny Pickett a lot of games, because that's all they're really asking their quarterback to do is be proficient, manage the game, don't turn the ball over. If Kenny can be that and the Browns can win games behind that, then the direction they're going to go, to me, seems fairly obvious. Now, how likely do I think this scenario is? I'm not a big believer of it, right? I think Kenny Pickett doesn't use the middle of the field simply because he's not talented enough to use the middle of the field. He's late. Like, he's not a fast enough processor, and his arm strength isn't good enough to where he can make up for that, right? Some guys have strong enough arms to where they can make up for being late. Some guys have arms or fast enough processors where they can make up for being, a little bit less talented from a arm talent perspective. But when you're a little slow and you're a little bit weak in arm, then that ends up being a pretty dangerous combination in the NFL, at least for NFL offenses. It becomes very advantageous or useful for NFL defenses. So that's my thing. My greatest fear with starting Kenny Pickett is this is the one guy on the roster I feel like has the most potential for the offense to look like it did with Deshaun and look like it did with Dorian Thompson-Robinson last year. Like, if I had to pick a guy who I think can make the offense look like that, it would be him. And then second would probably be Dillon Gabriel, which I'll talk to when I have my video about Dillon Gabriel come out later this week. But those are the two that really concern me, right? With Joe Flacco, I know I'm going to get some version of either like Jameis Winston chaos or Joe Flacco chaos, but I know it's going to be productive, or at least a more productive offense than what we had when Dorian and Deshaun were out there. So that's my big fear with Kenny. I look at him and I think to myself, this is how we end up with like 2024 Deshaun Watson again. Now, if he wins the job, if he's using the middle of the field well, if he's attacking and like all these things I'm concerned about, he mitigates a little bit and then he carries it over to the regular season, because Kenny has looked good in the preseason before and not carried that shit over to the regular season. So he carries it over to the regular season. Then, okay, cool. My fears are alleviated, but I am very concerned about it looking like that. And that's why I'm not a big fan of starting Kenny Pickett. But we'll see what happens. Y'all let me know in the comment section down below what you think about Kenny Pickett potentially being the starter. Have a great day. Have an even better night. Peace.